In a Pittsburgh tavern, a quiet bartender was about to face his deadliest enemy. What started as serving drinks took a shocking turn when a Russian operative walked in seeking vengeance. Michael "Storm" Reeves wasn't your typical bartender. For 15 years, he had led Delta Force operations, known for eliminating threats with surgical precision. When he encountered Dmitri Volkov speaking Russian, he had no idea he was walking into an orchestrated hunt. Storm's recognition would lead to a deadly international conspiracy. What began as confrontation between warriors would become an unlikely alliance. The arms-dealing underworld would never be the same after these enemies discovered they were both betrayed pawns. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The glass slipped from Michael's hand with the precision of muscle memory caught, cleaned, shelved all while his eyes tracked the conversations at Murphy's Tavern like a radar sweep. 3 years of bartending in Pittsburgh's Strip District had given him a rhythm that felt almost like peace, almost. Another Iron City storm? Big Eddie Kowalski called from his usual stool, using the nickname that had somehow stuck despite Michael's careful efforts to blend into civilian anonymity. The steelworker's voice carried the easy familiarity of a man who'd been drinking at Murphy's since before Michael arrived, coming right up. Michael's voice carried none of the authority it once had when commanding Delta Force operations. Here, he was just another guy behind the bar, pouring drinks for men who worked with their hands and carried their own ghosts. The tavern hummed with its usual Tuesday evening crowd shift workers from the remaining steel mills, cops from the nearby precinct, a few college kids from Pitt brave enough to venture into the blue-collar sanctuary. Michael knew them all by name, their drink preferences, their stories. It was a different kind of intelligence gathering than he'd done in Afghanistan or Chechnya, but it served the same purpose: know your environment, identify threats, maintain control. Tommy Kowalski, Eddie's nephew and a Pittsburgh PD detective, slid onto his regular stool at the far end of the bar. His cop's eyes held the same hypervigilance that Michael recognized in his own mirror each morning. "Rough day?" Michael asked, already reaching for Tommy's preferred bourbon. 3 overdoses in Garfield, a domestic that went sideways, and my partner's convinced there's some kind of organized crime moving into the area. Tommy's laugh held no humor. "Just another day in paradise." Michael poured 2 fingers of Jameson, noting how Tommy's hand trembled slightly when he reached for the glass. Combat stress came in many forms. Michael had learned that the hard way. Some men found their wars in foreign countries. Others found them on the streets they'd grown up on. "You should talk to someone about that," Michael said quietly, refilling Tommy's water glass. "Yeah, like who?" "Department shrink who put it in my file." Tommy's eyes met Michael's in the bar mirror. "Besides, look who's talking. When's the last time you opened up to anybody about anything?" Before Michael could answer, the tavern's atmosphere shifted like the pressure drop before a storm. The conversation didn't stop, but something in the air changed, the way it had in the mountains of Chechnya when enemy scouts were close. Michael's hand moved instinctively toward where his sidearm would have been, finding only the bar towel tucked into his apron. The man who entered moved with a predator's grace, snow dusting the shoulders of an expensive coat that didn't belong in this neighborhood. Tall, lean, with the kind of watchful stillness that marked him as military even before Michael noticed the way his eyes cataloged exits and threats in a single sweep. Spetsnaz. Michael knew it with the same certainty he'd once known enemy positions from satellite intelligence. The man's movement patterns, the controlled way he claimed space, even his posture, everything screamed Russian Special Forces. The stranger approached the bar with deliberate steps, choosing the seat that gave him clear sight lines to both entrances. When he spoke, his English carried only the faintest accent. "Vodka, top shelf, neat." Michael's hands moved automatically, pouring beluga into a rocks glass, but his mind raced through possibilities. Coincidence seemed unlikely. Pittsburgh wasn't exactly a hotbed of Russian tourism, especially not in December. The man said quietly, his eyes never leaving Michael's face. The first snow of winter. The phrase hit Michael like shrapnel. Not because of the words themselves, but because of where he'd heard them before. Chechnya, the night his team died. The last transmission before everything went to hell. Michael set the vodka down with steady hands, though his pulse hammered against his throat. Must be cold out there, not as cold as some places. The stranger's smile held no warmth. Some places stay with you forever, in your bones, in your dreams. Tommy shifted on his stool, cop instincts picking up the undercurrent of tension. Everything all right here? Fine, Michael replied, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who'd talked his way out of ambush and through enemy checkpoints. Just discussing the weather. The Russian lifted his glass in what might have been a toast. To winter memories, he said in English, then added in Russian. And to those who remember them. Michael's training kicked in: assess, analyze, respond. This wasn't random. Someone had found him. After 3 years of careful anonymity, someone had tracked down Michael Storm Reeves, former Delta Force commander, and walked into his sanctuary. The stranger finished his vodka in one smooth motion, then placed a $50 bill on the bar. Far too much for a single drink, even top-shelf vodka. The message was clear: I know who you are, and I'm not hiding. As he stood to leave, man leaned forward slightly. He said quietly, Dmitri Volkov. Then, switching to English, we have much to discuss, Commander Reeves. Michael's blood turned to ice water. No one in Pittsburgh knew his rank, number. One knew his real background. He'd been Michael Storm, the quiet bartender, for 3 years. Hearing his actual name and rank felt like having a weapon pressed against his temple. Dmitri straightened, his hand briefly touching something concealed beneath his coat. Tomorrow evening, same time, I'll be here. He walked out into the swirling snow, leaving Michael gripping the bar's edge hard enough to whiten his knuckles. The $50 bill lay on the scarred wood like an accusation. Tommy was studying him with cop eyes. Friend of yours? No. Michael's voice came out steady, despite the chaos in his head. Tourist, I think. Probably lost. But they both knew that was a lie. Men like Dmitri Volkov didn't get lost. They found exactly what they were looking for. As Michael cleaned up the stranger's glass, he caught his reflection in the mirror behind the bar. For just a moment, he saw not the quiet bartender in his apron, but Commander Storm, Delta Force operator, the man who'd led missions into places that didn't exist on any map. That man had enemies. That man had ghosts. And now, it seemed, they'd finally found him. Michael's apartment sat in darkness as he stared through Venetian blinds at the empty street below. The $50 bill from Dmitri Volkov lay on his kitchen table like evidence of a crime, crisp, deliberate, impossible to ignore. 3 hours had passed since closing Murphy's, but sleep remained as distant as the peace he'd thought he'd found. His hands moved with practiced efficiency through the ritual he'd hoped never to perform again. The false bottom of his bedroom closet yielded a Glock 19, 3 magazines, and a combat knife that had seen action from Fallujah to the Hindu Kush. The weapons felt foreign in his civilian hands, yet familiar as old scars. The Mossberg 500 came from behind the water heater. Cash 10,000 in hundreds from inside a hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick. Fake passports, clean phones, untraceable credit cards. The infrastructure of a man who'd learned that disappearing completely required preparation and patience. Michael laid everything on his bed, inventory complete. Enough firepower for a small war. Enough documentation to become someone else entirely. The question burning in his chest was simple: run or stand? Across the street, barely visible in the shadow of a shuttered automotive shop, Dmitri Volkov sat in a rented Camry and watched. The American's apartment had gone dark an hour ago, but movement behind the blinds suggested Michael Reeves' storm wasn't sleeping any better than Dmitri was. Dmitri's phone buzzed. Text message from his handler. Status report required. He typed back, target located. Assessment in progress. The lie came easily. In truth, the assessment had been complete the moment he'd seen Michael behind that bar. This wasn't the broken shell of a man that 3 years of civilian life should have produced. This was a predator in camouflage, every bit as dangerous as the intelligence file suggested, maybe more so. The memories came unbidden. They always did when he allowed himself to think about Chechnya. The briefing room in Moscow, his handler's calm voice explaining the mission parameters. American Delta Force team had stolen classified Russian weapons technology. Dmitri's job was simple: track them down, eliminate the threat, recover the materials. What his handler hadn't mentioned was that the Americans weren't thieves. They were victims, just like the Russian soldiers who died in that mountain pass. Pawns in someone else's game. Dmitri's hand drifted to the flask in his coat pocket, real vodka, not the expensive stuff he'd ordered at Murphy's. The burn helped wash away the taste of bitter truth. He'd been played, used, manipulated into killing men who'd been betrayed by their own people, just as he'd been betrayed by his. 3 years later, honor demanded he finish what he'd started. But honor, Dmitri was beginning to realize, was a luxury men like him could rarely afford. Michael's phone rang at 2:17 a.m. Father Martinez. Couldn't sleep either? The priest's voice carried the weight of a man who'd counseled too many warriors through too many dark nights. How did you know? Because I've been doing this long enough to recognize the signs. And because Mrs. Chun called, she saw someone sitting in a car across from your building for the past 4 hours. Michael moved to the window. The Camry was still there, a shadow within shadows. Just neighborhood watch stuff, Father. Nothing to worry about. Son, I was a Marine chaplain for 8 years before I found my calling here. I know the difference between neighborhood watch and operational surveillance. Martinez's voice softened. Whatever's brought your past knocking, you don't have to face it alone. For 3 years, Michael had attended weekly sessions with Father Martinez, not confessions, exactly, but conversations that helped him process the weight he carried. The priest had never pushed for details about Michael's military service, but somehow he'd understood that the man who poured drinks at Murphy's had once carried different responsibilities. There are things in my past, Father. Things I can't undo. Can't undo or won't face? The question hung in the air like incense smoke. Through the blinds, Michael watched the Camry's occupant light a cigarette, a brief flare that illuminated sharp Slavic features. 3 years ago, my team was betrayed on a mission. Good men died because someone sold us out. Michael's voice remained steady, but his free hand clenched into a fist. I survived. Sometimes I wonder if that was a blessing or a curse. Survival is always a blessing, Michael. What you do with it determines whether it becomes something more. After hanging up, Michael sat in his kitchen chair and stared at the Glock on his table. Dmitri Volkov's presence meant someone had decided Storm was a loose end that needed tying up. The smart play was to disappear, take the money, use the fake papers, become someone else in another city. But running meant abandoning everything he'd built here, Tommy's friendship, Father Martinez's guidance, the simple peace of serving drinks to honest people who worked hard for their money. It meant abandoning the life he'd fought so hard to create. Dmitri's phone buzzed again. This time, a call. Report, the familiar voice demanded. Target is aware of surveillance. Recommend moving to active phase. Negative. Continue observation. We need to understand his current capabilities and connections before proceeding. Dmitri hesitated. Sir, if the objective is elimination, prolonged surveillance increases risk of exposure. The objective has evolved, Agent Volkov. Storm may have intelligence value beyond his termination. Learn what he knows, who he trusts, what leverage points exist. The line went dead, leaving Dmitri staring at his phone. Intelligence value. Leverage points. The clinical language of manipulation that he'd once found comforting now left him cold. He thought about the man behind those blinds, Michael Storm Reeves, Delta Force commander, survivor of Chechnya. A warrior who'd found peace only to have it shattered by men who viewed human lives as chess pieces. Men like Dmitri himself. The cigarette burned down to his fingers, pain focusing his thoughts. Tomorrow evening, he would return to Murphy's Tavern. He would continue the dance of predator and prey that his handlers demanded. But for the first time in his career, Dmitri Volkov wondered if he was hunting the right enemy. Across the street, Michael's apartment went completely dark. But Dmitri knew that meant nothing. Men like Storm didn't sleep when death was watching from the shadows. They planned, they prepared. And sometimes, if they were very good and very lucky, they survived long enough to strike back. The snow began falling harder, covering Pittsburgh. In a blanket of false peace that both men recognized for the illusion it was. The snow had stopped by Wednesday evening, leaving Pittsburgh streets slick with the kind of treacherous ice that made even seasoned locals walk carefully. Michael arrived at Murphy's Tavern an hour early, using the time to check sight lines, review escape routes, and prepare for whatever Dmitri Volkov had planned. The regulars filtered in with their usual rhythm, Big Eddie complaining about overtime. Shifts, a group of off-duty cops cleaning their corner table, college kids brave enough to venture into working-class territory. Michael served them all with the same steady professionalism he'd maintained for 3 years, but his awareness remained laser-focused on the front door. Tommy Kowalski slid onto his usual stool at 7:30, but tonight something was different. In his posture, the detective's eyes held the sharp focus of a man who'd spent his day asking questions. "Storm, you ever hear of a guy named Viktor Kozlov?" Tommy kept his voice casual, but Michael caught the underlying tension. Michael's hand stilled on the glass he was cleaning. "Should I have?" Name came up in a briefing today. FBI's been tracking unusual financial activity in the city shell companies, offshore accounts, the kind of stuff that makes federal accountants nervous. Tommy accepted the bourbon Michael poured without breaking eye contact. "Word is someone's been moving serious money through Pittsburgh, the kind of money that usually means trouble's coming." Before Michael could respond, the tavern's atmosphere shifted again. Dmitri Volkov entered precisely at 8 o'clock, this time wearing jeans and a leather jacket that made him look more like a local than the expensive coat from the previous night. But Michael wasn't fooled by the costume change. The man's movements still carried the controlled precision of Spetsnaz training. Dmitri approached the bar, but instead of taking his previous seat, he moved to engage other customers. Michael watched him work the room with the skill of a trained intelligence operative, buying drinks for the college kids, listening to Big Eddie's stories about the old steel mills, even sharing a joke with the off-duty cops. "Friend of yours is back," Tommy observed, his cop instincts clearly triggered by Dmitri's presence. "Tourist," Michael replied, but his eyes never left the Russian as he charmed Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow who came in twice a week for a single glass of wine and conversation. The performance was masterful. Dmitri transformed himself from predator to friendly stranger, gathering intelligence about Michael's environment and connections with the subtlety of a professional. But Michael recognized the technique because he'd used it himself in dozens of operations. Social engineering, they called it in the intelligence community, mapped the target's world before moving in for the kill. 20 minutes into Dmitri's charm offensive, a new player entered the game. The woman who walked through Murphy's front door carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. Auburn hair, sharp eyes that cataloged everything in a single sweep, professional attire that suggested federal employment. She chose a seat at the bar with clear sight lines to both Dmitri and Michael, ordering a glass of red wine while studying the tavern's dynamics. When she spoke, her voice carried the neutral accent of someone who'd learned to blend into any environment. "Busy place for a Tuesday night," she said to Michael. "Regulars like their routine," he replied, noting how her eyes tracked Dmitri's movements through the mirror behind the bar. "I'm Madison Huff." She extended a hand with the firm grip of someone who'd learned early that first impressions mattered. "FBI, I'm conducting some background research in the area." Michael's pulse quickened, but his expression remained neutral. "Michael Storm, I-10 Bar. Storm's an interesting name. It's what people call me, seemed to fit." Madison's smile suggested she knew exactly how much truth that statement contained. "I imagine you hear a lot of interesting stories, working in a place like this. People talk when they drink. Mostly about work, family, sports. Nothing that would interest the FBI." But Madison's attention had shifted to Dmitri, who was now demonstrating some kind of card trick for the college kids. Her professional assessment was nearly as subtle as Dmitri's performance, but Michael caught the way her eyes narrowed as she studied the Russian's movements. "Your friend there, he's got excellent situational awareness for a tourist. You think he's something else?" "I think he moves like someone with advanced tactical training. Military, maybe special operations." Madison's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The kind of training that doesn't come from weekend warrior courses." Across the room, Dmitri's card trick went wrong in a way that seemed entirely accidental. A glass tumbled from the table, spinning through the air in what should have been a simple accident. But Dmitri's reflexes were too fast, too precise. He caught the falling glass with a movement that screamed combat conditioning. The college kids laughed and applauded, but Michael and Madison both recognized what they'd witnessed. Dmitri had just demonstrated reflexes honed by years of life or death training, then tried to cover it with an embarrassed smile. "Impressive," Madison murmured. "Lucky catch," Michael replied, but his own cover was starting to fray. When Dmitri had moved to catch the glass, Michael's body had tensed in response muscle memory from operations where split-second reactions meant the difference between mission success and body bags. Madison caught that reaction too. Her eyes met Michael's in the mirror, and for a moment, two intelligence professionals studied each other without pretense. "You know," she said quietly, "for a bartender, you've got pretty good tactical awareness yourself." The moment stretched between them like a tripwire. Then Dmitri approached the bar, his performance as friendly tourist intact despite the demonstration of his true capabilities. "Another vodka, if you please," he said to Michael, then nodded politely to Madison. "Good evening, miss." "Evening," Madison replied, her voice carrying new interest. "Visiting Pittsburgh?" "Business trip," Dmitri answered smoothly. "Import-export. Always good to experience local culture." "What do you import?" The question seemed casual, but Michael heard the professional edge beneath Madison's friendly tone. "Various goods from Eastern Europe. Specialty items for collectors." Dmitri's smile was perfect, just the right amount of modesty and enthusiasm. "Nothing too exciting, I'm afraid." But as he spoke, his eyes found Michael's in the mirror. The message was clear. "We both know what game we're playing now." Michael poured the vodka with steady hands, acutely aware that three intelligence professionals were now circling each other, like wolves in his carefully constructed sanctuary. The peace he'd built at Murphy's Tavern was disintegrating with each passing moment. Dmitri finished his drink, left another generous tip, and headed for the door. But as he passed behind Madison's stool, he leaned close enough to whisper something in Russian that only Michael could hear. "The game has begun." The tavern's atmosphere remained unchanged for everyone else, but Michael felt the foundation of his new life cracking beneath his feet. Madison Huff's investigation into Pittsburgh's unusual financial activity had led her to a pattern that made her blood run cold. 7 shell companies, all registered within the past 6 months. 12 offshore accounts funneling money through legitimate businesses. And at the center of it all, a name that had appeared in classified briefings about international arms dealers, Viktor Kozlov. She sat in her FBI field office at dawn, spreading surveillance photos across her desk like tarot cards revealing an ugly future. The Russian from Murphy's Tavern, Dmitri Volkov, according to facial recognition software, appeared in 3 of the photos, always in different locations, always watching. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Coffee shop on Penn Avenue, 1 hour. Come alone. Madison stared at the message, recognizing the direct communication style of someone with military training. Michael Storm, she realized. The bartender who moved like special operations and watched people like a trained killer. Michael arrived at the coffee shop 30 minutes early, choosing a table with clear sight lines to all entrances. When Madison walked in precisely on time, he noted the way she automatically checked for threats before approaching his table. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "Thank you for reaching out." Madison sat across from him, keeping her voice low. "I'm guessing this is about our mutual friend from last night. His name is Dmitri Volkov. Spetsnaz, probably GRU, and he's here to kill me." Madison's expression didn't change, but Michael caught the slight tightening around her eyes. Why would a Russian Special Forces operative want to kill a Pittsburgh bartender? Because 3 years ago, I wasn't a bartender. I was Delta Force, call sign Storm, and in Chechnya, Dmitri and I were on opposite sides of an operation that went very, very wrong. For the next 20 minutes, Michael told her about the mission to secure weapons-grade plutonium, the betrayal that led to his team's deaths, and his discovery that Russian intelligence had been fed the same false information as his own commanders. "So you're both victims," Madison concluded. "We're both survivors. There's a difference." Madison's phone chimed with an urgent alert. She glanced at the screen and cursed under her breath. 3 bodies found in a warehouse in Lawrenceville. Professional execution, no witnesses. Michael's blood chilled. Cleanup crew. What? Someone's tying up loose ends. If Dmitri's here, it means whoever orchestrated Chechnya is eliminating anyone who knows the truth. They left the coffee shop together, but before they could reach their vehicles, Michael's combat instincts screamed danger. The white van parked across the street had been empty when he'd arrived. Now it had occupants, and the angle was wrong for casual observation. Down! Michael threw himself sideways, tackling Madison behind a parked car as automatic weapons fire erupted from the van. Bullets shattered storefront windows and sparked off concrete, the distinctive chatter of suppressed MP5s filling the morning air. Michael drew the Glock he'd started carrying again, returning fire while keeping Madison pinned behind cover. The attackers were professionals, coordinated fields of fire, proper spacing, disciplined trigger control. This wasn't street violence. This was military-grade assassination. The van's rear doors opened, disgorging 3 operators in tactical gear. Michael counted muzzle flashes, calculated angles, and realized they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. In 30 seconds, the attackers would have clear shots on their position. That's when Dmitri Volkov appeared. The Russian materialized from behind the coffee shop like a ghost, moving with lethal precision. His first shot dropped the van's driver. His second took out the operator, providing overwatch. The remaining attackers spun to engage this new threat, giving Michael the opening he needed. The firefight lasted 90 seconds and left 4 bodies on Penn Avenue. When the shooting stopped, Michael found himself standing back-to-back with the man who'd come to kill him, both of them breathing hard and scanning for additional threats. "We need to move," Dmitri said in accented English. "More will come." Madison struggled to her feet, her FBI training warring with the surreal situation. What the hell just happened? "Someone wants us both dead," Michael replied, ejecting his spent magazine and reloading. which means we're asking the right questions. Dmitri holstered his weapon, a Makarov, that had seen recent use. Viktor Kozlov, he was our handler for Chechnya. Yours and mine. The name hit Michael like a physical blow. Viktor Kozlov, the smooth-talking intelligence broker who'd briefed his team before the mission. The man who'd assured them their target was a legitimate terrorist cell, not a Russian black ops team. He played us both, Michael said. And now he eliminates loose ends. Dmitri's eyes held the same bitter recognition that Michael felt. I came here to kill you because I thought you had betrayed my team. But you were betrayed too. Madison looked between them, her analytical mind processing the implications. So what now? You two shake hands and call it even? Now, Dmitri said, we find Viktor before he finds us. An hour later, they sat in Michael's apartment while Madison worked her FBI contacts and Dmitri studied intelligence files he'd pulled from encrypted servers. The uneasy alliance felt fragile as spun glass, but necessity had a way of creating strange partnerships. Kozlov's been busy, Madison reported. Shell companies in 12 countries, arms deals on 4 continents, and enough bribery to buy half. The intelligence community. He specializes in creating conflicts, then selling weapons to both sides, Dmitri added, scrolling through Russian intelligence reports. Chechnya was just one operation. He has been manipulating conflicts for 15 years. Michael studied photos of Viktor Kozlov, a middle-aged man with the kind of forgettable face that made him perfect for intelligence work. So how do we find him? Madison's phone rang. Tommy Kowalski. Storm's not answering his phone. Tommy's voice carried through the speaker. But I thought you should know we just found another body. Elena Petrov, Russian national. Shot execution style. But she had FBI surveillance photos in her hotel room. Photos of you, Dmitri, and Storm. Dmitri went very still. Elena was my partner. He struggled with English. My closest friend. I'm sorry, Michael said quietly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She came to extract me. To bring me home. Dmitri's voice hardened. Instead, Viktor had her killed. The Russian stood and walked to Michael's window, staring out at the city. When he spoke again, his voice carried a cold finality that Michael recognized from his own darkest moments. Viktor Kozlov thinks he can use us as pawns, then discard us when we become inconvenient. He thinks we are just broken soldiers who can be manipulated and eliminated. Dmitri turned back to face them, and Michael saw something dangerous awakening in the Russian's eyes. He is wrong. We are not pawns, we are weapons, and now we point ourselves at him. Elena Petrov had been dead for 6 hours by the time they reached the morgue, but Dmitri insisted on seeing her body. Michael and Madison waited in the hallway while he identified his partner, watching through the observation window as the Russian stood over the woman who'd been the closest thing to family he'd ever known. When Dmitri emerged, his face was carved from stone, but his hand shook as he lit a cigarette. She came to bring me home, he said quietly. Viktor told her I had gone rogue, that I needed extraction before I compromised ongoing operations. Instead, she walked into a trap, Madison observed. Elena was the best operative I knew. If Viktor could eliminate her so easily. Dmitri's voice trailed off, but the implication hung heavy between them. Michael's phone buzzed. Text message. From an unknown number, Heinz Memorial Chapel, 1 hour. Come alone, or more friends die. Viktor? Madison asked, reading over his shoulder. Has to be. Michael studied the message, recognizing the psychological pressure tactic. He's offering to trade information for a meeting. It's obviously a trap, Madison said. Of course it's a trap. But he's got something we need, or he wouldn't risk exposure. Michael looked at Dmitri. What do you know about Elena's mission? Parameters? She was given coordinates, extraction protocols, and told I had been compromised by American intelligence. Dmitri's laugh held no humor. All lies, obviously. But Elena believed them because they came through official channels. Madison's analytical mind was already working the angles. If Victor can manipulate Russian intelligence communications, he's got access to systems that should be impossible to penetrate. Unless he's being fed information from the inside, Michael replied. Someone in Moscow is working with him. They sat in Michael's kitchen, mapping out what they knew while the afternoon light faded outside. Viktor Kozlov wasn't just an arms dealer, he was a puppet master with strings reaching into multiple intelligence agencies. The Chechnya operation had been just one move in a much larger game. We need to know who his contact is in Russian intelligence, Dmitri said. Without that information, we cannot trust any official channels. And we need to understand why he's cleaning house now, Madison added. Something has changed, something that makes witnesses like you two suddenly too dangerous to leave alive. Michael was about to respond when movement outside caught his eye. A figure across the street, barely visible in the shadows between streetlights. Someone watching the building. We have company, he said quietly. Dmitri moved to the window, studying the street with professional eyes. 2 positions I can see. Probably more I cannot. Madison checked her service weapon. How do you want to play this? Before Michael could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he recognized but hadn't seen in 3 years. A number he'd thought was dead and buried with the rest of his Delta Force team. Marcus Bear Williams. Michael's hand trembled as he answered. Bear? Hello, Storm. The voice was familiar but wrong, hollow, broken, carrying the weight of unbearable compromise. Victor wants to talk. You're supposed to be dead. Michael's voice came out as barely a whisper. Sometimes I wish I was. Listen carefully, brother. Victor has me on a very short leash, and that leash gets shorter every time one of his assets gets compromised. Where are you? Heinz Chapel, like the message said. But Storm. Bear's voice cracked. He's got leverage on me. Things he'll do if I don't follow orders. Things worse than dying. The line went dead, leaving Michael staring at his phone like it had transformed into a venomous snake. Who was that? Madison asked. Marcus Williams. My point man in Delta Force. He was supposed to have died in Chechnya. Michael's voice was steady, but Dmitri caught the tremor in his hands. Victor has been collecting assets for 3 years, Dmitri said quietly. Broken soldiers he can manipulate and control. We can't meet him, Madison said. It's suicide. We can't not meet him, Michael replied. If Bear's alive, if he's been prisoner for 3 years. The words stuck in his throat. In Delta Force, you never left a man behind. That code had survived Michael's transition to civilian life, buried but not forgotten. It could be a lie, Madison pointed out. Psychological manipulation to draw you into the open. Maybe, but I heard his voice. I know Bear like I know my own heartbeat. Michael was already moving toward his weapons cache. Victor's got him, and he's using that fact to control me. Dmitri stubbed out his cigarette. Then we go, but we go smart. This is insane, Madison protested. I should call for backup, establish a perimeter. No. Michael's voice carried command authority. Victor's got sources inside intelligence agencies. The moment you make that call, Bear dies and we lose. Our only lead. Madison studied both men, recognizing the warrior code that bound them. She'd seen it before in her father, the way certain soldiers would walk into hell for their brothers. Then we do this right, she said finally. Full tactical assessment, multiple exit strategies, and backup plans for when everything goes wrong. Heinz Memorial Chapel sat on the University of Pittsburgh campus like a Gothic prayer frozen in stone. At 8 p.m., it was officially closed. But security was light enough for professionals to bypass. Michael approached from the east, using shadows and architectural cover to mask his movement. Through his earpiece, he heard Madison's position reports as she established overwatch from a nearby building. Dmitri had vanished into the campus, but Michael trusted the Russian was in position. The chapel's interior was tomb quiet, moonlight filtering through stained glass to paint rainbow patterns on empty pews. Michael moved down the center aisle, every instinct screaming danger, but Bear's voice echoing in his memory. "Hello, Storm." The voice came from the altar area, where a man stepped out of the shadows. Viktor Kozlov looked exactly like his intelligence photo's forgettable face. Expensive suit, the kind of man who could disappear in any crowd. "Where's Bear?" "Safe, for now." Victor's English carried only the faintest accent. "You look well." "Commander, civilian life agrees with you. Cut the bullshit." "What do you want?" Victor smiled, spreading his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. "I want to offer you a job. You and Mr. Volkov both. The intelligence community has use for operators of your caliber. The same intelligence community that betrayed us in Chechnya. That was regrettable but necessary. Sometimes good soldiers must be sacrificed for the greater mission." Victor's tone remained conversational, as if discussing weather. "But you survived, which demonstrates your value." Movement in the shadows behind the altar. Marcus Williams stepped into the light, and Michael's heart broke at what he saw. Bear had always been the biggest man on their team, solid muscle and booming laughter. The figure before him was gaunt, hollow-eyed, carrying himself like a man who'd been broken and poorly reassembled. "Storm," Bear's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. For all of it. It's not your fault, brother." "Yes," Victor interrupted. "It is. You see, Marcus has been working for me since Chechnya. His capture, his torture, his eventual recruitment, all carefully orchestrated to create the perfect asset." Michael's world tilted. "That's impossible." "Is it? Think, Commander. How did Russian intelligence know exactly where to find your team? How did they know your radio frequencies, your extraction protocols, your emergency rally points?" The truth hit Michael like a physical blow. Someone on his team had been feeding information to the Russians. Someone he'd trusted with his life. Bear's shoulders shook. "They had my sister, Storm. They said they'd kill her if I didn't cooperate. I only gave them basic intel, I swear." "I never thought." "You never thought they'd use it to murder your brothers," Victor finished. "But they did. And now you live with that knowledge every day." Michael stared at his former teammate, seeing 3 years of guilt and self-hatred carved into Bear's features. The man he'd mourned as a hero had been alive all along, carrying the weight of their team's betrayal. "Now," Victor continued, "you understand the leverage I possess. Not just over Marcus, but over you. Because deep down, you blame yourself for not seeing the signs. For not protecting your men, for surviving when they didn't." The chapel fell silent except for the whisper of wind through stone. Victor had laid bare the guilt that Michael carried like shrapnel in his chest, the survivor's remorse that had driven him to civilian anonymity. "Join me, Commander. Put your skills to proper use. Help me build something better than the corrupt agencies that abandoned you both." Michael looked at Bear, seeing his broken brother and the choice that would define everything that came next. Viktor Kozlov's smile widened as he watched Michael process the revelation about Bear's betrayal. The chapel's shadows seemed to deepen. Around them, stained glass windows casting fragments of colored light across the altar like broken prayers. "You're wondering how long," Victor said conversationally. "How many missions Marcus compromised before Chechnya? How many good soldiers died because of information he provided?" Bear flinched as if struck. "Storm, I swear it was only the one operation. They had Sarah, my sister, and they showed me photos of what they'd do to her." "Sarah Williams died in a car accident when you were 19, Michael said quietly, his voice hollow with understanding. "I was at her funeral, remember?" The color drained from Bear's face. That's impossible," They showed me current photos. She was alive, they had her. Victor's laughter echoed off the chapels. Stone walls. Digital manipulation is a wonderful tool for controlling assets. Amazing what people will believe when they desperately want it to be true. Bear's knees buckled, and he sank onto the altar steps like a marionette with cut strings. 3 years of believing he'd saved his sister. 3 years of justifying his betrayal with the knowledge that at least one person he loved was safe. All built on a lie. You see, Commander, the beauty of psychological operations isn't the grand deceptions. It's the small truths mixed with targeted lies. Marcus knew his sister was dead, but grief makes people vulnerable to hope. Michael's hand moved slowly toward his concealed weapon, but Victor raised a finger in warning. I wouldn't. You see, this conversation is being monitored by several of my associates. Any aggressive action results in immediate termination, not just of you and Mr. Volkov, but of Detective Kowalski, Father Martinez, and several other civilians you've grown attached to during your Pittsburgh exile. The threat hit Michael like ice water. Victor hadn't just found him, he'd mapped his entire support network, identified everyone who mattered in his carefully constructed civilian life. Tommy and Father Martinez aren't part of this, Michael said. They became part of it the moment you allowed them into your life. Emotional attachments, Commander, they're the greatest weakness of men like you. You can't save everyone, but you'll destroy yourself trying. Through his earpiece, Michael heard Madison's voice, barely a whisper. Multiple vehicles moving into position around the chapel. At least 8 hostiles, full tactical gear. Victor continued as if he hadn't just ordered a military-style assault on a university campus. The weapons-grade plutonium from Chechnya was just the beginning. Since then, I've brokered deals between corrupt intelligence agencies and the highest bidders. Chemical weapons to Syrian rebels, nuclear materials to Iranian proxies, biological agents to whatever faction offers the most interesting opportunities. You're talking about arming terrorists, Michael said. I'm talking about evolution, Commander. The old world order is dying nation-states bound by treaties and international law, intelligence agencies serving governments instead of profit. I'm building something cleaner, more efficient. Dmitri's voice crackled through the storm. We need to move. They have Madison's position compromised. Victor heard the transmission through hidden speakers, his smile growing broader. Mr. Volkov joins us electronically. Please share with the class, Dmitri. Tell Commander Reeves what you discovered about Elena's real mission. Silence stretched for several seconds before Dmitri's voice returned, heavy with betrayal. Elena was not sent to extract me. She was sent to eliminate both of us. Her orders came directly from my handler in Moscow. Your handler being Colonel Yuri Petrov, Victor added helpfully. Elena's father, though she never knew it. I do so enjoy family reunions. The psychological warfare was masterful, Michael realized. Victor hadn't just brought them here to recruit or eliminate them. He'd orchestrated this entire confrontation to demonstrate his reach, his ability to manipulate anyone and everyone in their lives. Elena died not knowing she was following orders to kill the man she loved, Victor continued. Colonel Petrov ordered his own daughter's death to protect his arrangement with me. Such is the power of properly applied leverage. Bear raised his head, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. How many others, Victor? How many people have you destroyed for your games? I prefer to think of it as renovation. Tearing down corrupt structures to build something better. Marcus here has helped me identify dozens of compromised intelligence assets over the past 3 years. Former Delta Force operators, ex-SEALs, retired CIA operatives, all of them carrying guilt and trauma that makes them malleable. Michael felt the full scope of Victor's operation crystallizing. It wasn't just about arms dealing or intelligence brokering. Victor was building a private army of broken warriors using their guilt and grief as chains to bind them to his service. Some join willingly, seeking redemption through purpose. Others require more persuasion. Victor gestured toward Bear. But eventually, they all serve. Because I offer them what their governments never could: honest acknowledgement that they're weapons, not people. And if we refuse, Michael asked, then you die. Not quickly and not alone. Tommy Kowalski will suffer a tragic accident during what appears to be a routine traffic stop. Father Martinez will be found dead of an apparent heart attack. Agent Huff will simply disappear into the same black sites where Elena Petrov spent her final hours. Madison's voice came through the cum, strained but controlled. Storm, whatever he's offering, don't take it. We knew the risks. Victor's expression shifted, showing genuine pleasure. Agent Huff demonstrates the kind of courage I value. Perhaps she would make a valuable addition to my organization as well. Leave her out of this, Michael said. I'm afraid that's no longer possible. You see, Agent Huff has been investigating my Pittsburgh operations for weeks. Her files contain enough evidence to disrupt several lucrative contracts. That makes her either an asset or a liability. The tactical situation was collapsing rapidly. Victor held all the cards: hostages, superior numbers, psychological leverage over both Michael and Dmitri. Every exit strategy Michael had planned assumed they could fight their way out, but Victor had made that impossible by threatening civilians. I need time to consider your offer, Michael said, buying precious seconds to think. Of course, 30 seconds should be sufficient. That's not enough time to... It's exactly enough time, Commander. Because deep down, you already know there's only one choice that saves the people you care about. Victor checked his watch with theatrical precision. 20 seconds. Bear struggled to his feet, swaying but upright. Storm, don't let him turn you into what he made me. Some things are worse than dying. 15 seconds. Michael's mind raced through possibilities, calculating odds, measuring the distance between where he stood and where Victor waited. 1 shot, if he was fast enough. But Victor's associates would still carry out their threats. 10 seconds. Through the cum, he heard Madison's voice, calm and clear. Storm, Dmitri, when I give the signal, be ready to move. I've got an idea. 5 seconds. Victor's smile was triumphant, certain of victory. Time's up, Commander. What's your decision? Before Michael could answer, the chapel's lights died, plunging them into moonlit darkness as Madison's voice cut through the cum. Signal is now. Move, move. The chapel erupted into chaos as smoke grenades detonated near the altar, filling the sacred space with dense gray clouds that turned the moonlight into a surreal fog. Michael dropped and rolled left, using the pews for cover as automatic weapons fire shattered stained glass windows above his head. Madison's idea became clear as she engaged Victor's Overwatch teams from her sniper position, her precise shots forcing them to take cover instead of maintaining surveillance on the chapel entrances. In the confusion, Dmitri materialized from the shadows like a ghost, moving toward Victor's position with lethal intent. But Victor was no amateur. The arms dealer had vanished into the smoke, leaving only his voice echoing through hidden speakers. Impressive initiative, Agent Huff, but you've just signed death warrants for every civilian on your list. Michael Lowe crawled toward where he'd last seen Bear, finding his former teammate crouched behind the altar, hands pressed against his ears as gunfire echoed through the chapel. Bear, we need to move. I can't. The broken soldier's voice was nearly a scream. If I run, if I disobey, he'll hurt them. He'll hurt everyone. There's no them, brother. You heard him. It was all lies. Your sister's been dead for years. But 3 years of psychological conditioning couldn't be erased by logic. Bear's eyes held the wild look of a man whose reality had been systematically demolished and rebuilt according to someone else's design. Dmitri's voice cut through the chaos. "Storm! Victor is moving toward the north exit. If he escapes, we lose him." Michael faced an impossible choice. Chase Victor and risk losing Bear forever, or stay and try to save a man who might be too broken to be saved. In Delta Force, the mission always came first. But looking at Bear's shattered expression, Michael realized that some missions mattered more than others. "Dmitri, go. Don't let him get away." "What about, I've got Bear. Go." The Russian hesitated for a fraction of a second, then vanished into the smoke. Through the chapel's damaged windows, Michael could hear Madison engaging multiple targets, her precise shots keeping Victor's ground team pinned down. "Bear, listen to me." Michael grabbed his former teammate's shoulders, forcing eye contact. "I know Victor broke you. I know he made you believe things that weren't true. But you're still my brother. You're still family. I got our team killed." Bear whispered. "I fed them information, and they died because of me." "No, they died because Victor manipulated both sides of a conflict for profit. You were a victim, not a perpetrator." Tears streamed down Bear's face. "How do you forgive something like that?" "The same way you forgave me for surviving when they didn't." The words hung between them as gunfire continued to echo through the chapel. Bear's conditioning warred with 3 years of suppressed grief and guilt, but slowly, recognition dawned in his eyes. "Storm? Yeah, brother, it's me." Bear straightened slightly, some spark of his old self flickering back to life. "What's the mission?" "Get you out of here. Get all of us out of here. Victor's got a command post in the old Carey furnace. Industrial complex about 3 miles east." Bear's voice grew stronger as he focused on providing intelligence. "He's been using it as a base for Pittsburgh operations. How many personnel?" 20, maybe 30. Mix of former special operations and private military contractors." Bear paused, old tactical instincts reasserting themselves. "But Storm, he's got contingencies. If his primary position is compromised, he'll activate sleeper cells across the city." Before Michael could respond, Madison's voice crackled through the cum. "Movement on the south side. 3 vehicles, heavy weapons. We need to extract now." Michael helped Bear to his feet, noting how his former teammate moved with growing confidence as his training overcame his conditioning. Whatever Victor had done to break him, the core soldier remained intact. They moved through the smoke-filled chapel toward a side exit Madison had identified during their planning phase. Behind them, Victor's remaining forces were regrouping, their professional movements suggesting they'd recover quickly from the initial surprise. Outside Pittsburgh's winter air cut through the smoke and cordite smell, sharp and clean. Dmitri stood beside the stolen vehicle, his face set in a grim line. "Victor got away," he said. "But I managed to tag his car with a tracker." Emerging from her sniper perch with swift, deliberate movements, Madison approached. She moved, like someone who had just neutralized multiple threats and was ready for more. His team's pulling back, but they'll regroup fast. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they sweep this area properly. Where's the signal heading? Michael asked. Dmitri glanced at his tracking device. East, toward the industrial sector. It's moving fast. Carey Furnace, Bear said, his voice low. That's his main base of operations. Madison turned to him, sizing him up with sharp eyes. You're Marcus Williams. The FBI has you listed as Kier in Chechnya. I was, Bear replied. Victor just didn't bother finishing the job. Can you fight? Dmitri asked, without pretense. Bear gave a hollow laugh tinged with bitterness, but beneath it, Michael caught a note he hadn't heard in years, the steel of the soldier he used to know. Victor spent 3 years trying to erase me, strip away everything I was. But he made one mistake. He let me live. And now I remember exactly what Delta Force taught me about payback. What's that? Madison asked. Michael and Bear answered together, swift, certain, and overwhelming. As they piled into the vehicle, Michael felt something stirring something he hadn't felt since their days in Chechnya. A deep, instinctive sense of unity. Dmitri had proven himself under pressure. Madison had stood her ground like any seasoned operator. And Bear, though scarred and worn, was still his brother. Viktor Kozlov had miscalculated. He believed that trauma would break them, that guilt would keep them down. But some bonds aren't so easily severed. Some families are chosen, and they fight like hell to stay that way. The vehicle tore through Pittsburgh's industrial outskirts, heading toward a decisive confrontation. What lay ahead wasn't just a tactical assault. It was a battle over the soul of everything Viktor had twisted. In the distance, the rusting carcass of Carey Furnace loomed against the winter sky, a steel skeleton promising both reckoning and violence. Though long since abandoned, the Carey Furnace now served a dark new purpose. As they neared, Michael saw why Viktor had chosen it. Multiple escape routes, long sight lines, and layers of concrete and steel that could withstand serious combat. Thermal scans picking up at least 15 heat signatures. Madison reported, scanning with her FBI-grade thermal gear. Spread across 3 buildings. Heavy presence in the admin tower. Bear leaned forward from the back. The haze in his eyes cleared, and the tactician in him came alive. Viktor hates air surveillance. Expect surface-to-air missiles on the tallest platforms. How do you know that? Dmitri asked. Because I helped design the layout, Bear said, his voice thick with guilt. He used my training to build a fortress. Michael raised binoculars, surveying lines of defense and potential entry points. What about underground? There's a tunnel network. Connects all the major buildings' old utility paths, big enough to move teams through. Bear's tone turned grim. There are prisoners down there. People who refuse to join him. The weight of that landed hard. Viktor wasn't just recruiting damaged soldiers. He was capturing those with skills or intel he could use. Anyone not useful got disposed of. How many? Madison asked. Last I counted 12. Intelligence agents, ex-military contractors, a couple of investigative journalists who dug too deep. Bear's hands curled into fists. He forces the recruits to guard them, makes you complicit. It breaks you faster when you're part of their suffering. Dmitri's face darkened. Elena was tracking missing operatives. How many of Viktor's followers are actually prisoners? Most, Bear said. The loyal ones are rare. Most of us were broken, reshaped into what he wanted. Michael lowered the binoculars, his tactical assessment complete. The fortress was formidable, but not impregnable. The real challenge would be getting to Viktor before he could activate whatever contingency plans he'd prepared. Multiple entry points, he said. Dmitri and I take the main approach, draw their attention. Madison provides overwatch and sniper support. Bear, you know the tunnel system. Can you reach the prisoners? Yeah, but Storm. Bear hesitated. Some of those guards used to be good soldiers. They're not evil, just broken, if we can avoid killing them. We try for non-lethal when possible, Michael agreed. But if they're shooting at us, we shoot back. Madison checked her equipment one final time. What about Viktor? He's not going to wait around for us to fight our way through his defenses. He will, Dmitri said with cold certainty. Viktor's ego demands that he face us personally. He wants to prove his superiority, to demonstrate that we are nothing more than obsolete weapons he can discard at will. You sound like you know him pretty well, Madison observed. I should. He recruited me when I was 17, fresh out of Spetsnaz training. Told me I was special, that I had potential beyond what my government could offer. Dmitri's smile was razor sharp. It took me 15 years to realize I was just another asset in his collection. They approached the complex from 3 directions, using the industrial ruins as cover. Michael and Dmitri moved through the main gate like they owned the place. counting on surprise and audacity to get them past the outer perimeter. The first guard post was manned by 2 operators who looked like former military alert, professional, but carrying themselves with the hollow fatigue that marked Victor's broken soldiers. Michael recognized the look from his own mirror during the worst of his PTSD episodes. "Federal agents," Michael announced, badge visible. "We need to speak with Viktor Kozlov about an ongoing investigation." The guards exchanged glances, uncertainty replacing alertness. Victor's psychological conditioning was thorough, but it hadn't prepared them for a direct professional approach. "Sir, we'll need to verify with," Dmitri moved like flowing water, applying a sleeper hold that dropped the first guard in seconds. Michael took the second with a precise strike to the carotid artery. Both men went down quietly, unconscious but unharmed. "2 down, 13 to go," Michael murmured into his cum. Madison's voice crackled back. "Sniper teams on the tower have clear shots on your position. Stay low and keep moving." They advanced through the complex, using industrial machinery and structural pillars for cover. Victor's defensive positions were well planned, but they were designed to repel a frontal assault, not infiltration by professionals who understood the terrain. Bear's voice came through the cum. "I'm in the tunnel system. Found the prisoners. They're alive but in bad shape. Some of them have been here for months. Can you get them out?" Michael asked. "Working on it." "But Storm, Victor's got something else down here. Looks like a weapons cache. Military-grade stuff, enough firepower to level a city block." The revelation added urgency to their mission. If Victor felt cornered, he might decide to take half of Pittsburgh with him rather than surrender. They reached the main administrative building without encountering further resistance, which worried Michael more than open combat would have. Victor was too smart to leave his primary position undefended. The building's interior had been converted into a command center that would have impressed Pentagon planners. Multiple workstations monitored global communications traffic, weapons transactions, and intelligence operations across 6 continents. Wall-mounted displays showed real-time feeds from conflict zones where Victor's arms sales were providing the tools of war. "Impressive, isn't it?" Victor's voice echoed through hidden speakers. 20 years of careful cultivation, building networks that span governments and criminal organizations alike. Michael and Dmitri moved deeper into the facility, weapons ready, following the sound of Victor's voice through corridors lined with servers and communication equipment. "You know, Commander, I've been monitoring your activities since you left the military. Your transition to civilian life was admirably thorough, but you can't erase instincts forged in combat. You're still a weapon, despite your bartender's apron." They found Victor in what had once been the plant manager's office, now converted into a nerve center of screens and communication devices. He stood with his back to them, studying displays that showed tactical positions throughout the complex. "You came here expecting a final confrontation," Victor said without turning around. "Some climactic battle where good triumphs over evil through superior firepower and righteous determination." "Something like that," Michael replied, his weapon trained on Victor's center mass. Victor finally turned, his hands empty but his expression confident. "But you see, gentlemen, you've already lost. Because while you've been fighting your way through my defenses, my real operation has been proceeding exactly as planned." On the screens around them, feeds from cameras throughout Pittsburgh showed Victor's sleeper cells moving into position. Federal buildings, police stations, the university campus where they'd first confronted each other, all were being infiltrated by teams of armed operatives. Agent Huff's FBI colleagues are about to discover that their investigation has triggered a citywide crisis, Victor continued. Hostage situations at multiple locations, simultaneous attacks on infrastructure targets, and demands for the immediate release of certain high-value prisoners. Dmitri's weapon never wavered. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Victor gestured toward One of the screens, which showed Tommy Kowalski being held at gunpoint in what looked like the Pittsburgh PD evidence room. Detective Kowalski is a good man. It would be unfortunate if his investigation of my operations resulted in his death. Michael felt the familiar weight of impossible choices, the kind that had defined his military career and haunted his civilian exile. Save the city by eliminating Victor, or save his friend by negotiating with a terrorist. What do you want? He asked. Simple. You and Mr. Volkov join my organization willingly. Agent Huff disappears into my network. Marcus Williams resumes his duties as my asset. Victor's smile was genuinely pleasant. In exchange, Pittsburgh remains a peaceful city, and your friend Detective Kowalski lives to solve other crimes. Bear's voice crackled through the cum. Storm, I've got the prisoners clear, but there's something else. Victor's rigged this whole place with explosives. Enough C4 to level the complex and everything within a quarter mile. Victor's smile widened as he noticed their expressions. Insurance, gentlemen. If I can't have what I want, then no one gets what they want. Madison's voice cut through the tension. Michael, we've got FBI tactical teams surrounding the complex. They're moving to arrest Victor's sleeper cells simultaneously. How? Dmitri demanded. Because, Victor said, his confidence finally showing cracks. Agent Huff has been more resourceful than I anticipated. On one of the screens, they watched as FBI teams stormed the locations where Victor's operatives were positioned. Synchronized raids, perfectly timed, rolling up his entire Pittsburgh network in a matter of minutes. Victor's hand moved toward what looked like a detonator, but Michael was faster. The shot took Victor in the shoulder, spinning him away from the device and sending him crashing into a bank of monitors. It's over, Victor, Michael said, moving to secure the detonator. Victor laughed, blood seeping through his expensive shirt. You think this is over? This was just one city, one small operation. I have networks in 40 countries, assets in every major intelligence agency. Then we'll take them down one at a time, Dmitri said quietly. Will you? Are you prepared to spend the rest of your lives hunting shadows? Are you ready to become exactly what I offered to make you professional killers in service of an endless war? The question hung in the air as sirens wailed outside. FBI tactical team securing the complex. Victor had been captured, his immediate threat neutralized, but his larger network remained intact. Michael looked at Dmitri, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in the Russian's eyes. They'd won the battle, but the war Victor described was real, vast, and would require sacrifices neither of them was sure they were prepared to make. The FBI debriefing lasted 18 hours, conducted in a sterile conference room that smelled of coffee and disinfectant. Michael sat across from a panel of federal agents, Pentagon officials, and State Department representatives, answering the same questions in different variations, while lawyers and intelligence analysts scribbled notes. Let's go over the Chechnya operation one more time, Deputy Director Sarah Chun said, her voice carrying the patience of someone who'd conducted hundreds of these sessions. You're saying that both American and Russian intelligence were manipulated by the same source? Viktor Kozlov orchestrated the entire mission, Michael replied, his voice hoarse from hours of testimony. He fed false intelligence to both sides, using the operation to steal weapons-grade plutonium while eliminating witnesses who might expose his network. Through the conference room's one-way mirror, Michael could see Madison coordinating with FBI analysts, mapping the scope of Victor's operations across multiple continents. Dmitri sat in an adjacent room, undergoing his own debriefing with officials from various agencies whose acronyms Michael didn't recognize. Bear had been taken to a military medical facility for psychological evaluation and treatment. 3 years of conditioning would take time to undo, but the doctors were optimistic about his recovery. The Delta Force operator they'd known was still in there, buried under layers of imposed trauma, but fundamentally intact. "The weapons cache Mr. Williams discovered," another official said, consulting his tablet. "Preliminary analysis suggests enough firepower to supply a small army." Where was Victor planning to deploy these resources? "He didn't share his strategic plans with me," Michael said dryly. "But based on his communications traffic, I'd guess he was planning to create conflicts he could profit from. Arm opposing factions, then sell weapons to both sides." Deputy Director Chun leaned forward. "We need to understand the full scope of his network. How many assets like yourself were compromised? How many operations were manipulated for his benefit?" Michael had been asking himself the same questions. Victor's influence reached back years, possibly decades. How many missions had been compromised? How many soldiers had died for his profit margins? "You'll need to review every operation Victor had access to," Michael said. "Cross-reference with unexplained intelligence breaches, missions that went sideways without clear cause, assets that disappeared or were compromised. That could be hundreds of operations across multiple agencies," the Pentagon representative protested. "Then you'd better get started." 3 days later, Michael found himself in Father Martinez's study, surrounded by theological books and the comforting smell of old leather. The priest poured 2 glasses of whiskey-good Irish stuff. That burned away the sterile taste of federal interrogation rooms. "You look like hell," Father Martinez observed. "Feel worse." Michael accepted the whiskey gratefully. "How do you process something like this? Learning that everything you believed about your service, your mission, was built on lies?" "The same way you process any betrayal. You acknowledge the pain, learn from it, and choose what to do next." The priest settled into his chair, studying Michael with eyes that had seen too many broken soldiers. "Your service wasn't a lie, son. The missions you completed, the lives you saved, the brothers you protected, that was real. Victor's manipulation doesn't erase the good you did. Tell that to the families of the men who died in Chechnya." "I will, if you give me their addresses." Father Martinez's voice carried quiet authority. "Because they need to know their sons and husbands died as heroes, not as casualties of some arms dealer's profit scheme." Michael stared into his whiskey, seeing reflections of the past 3 years. The careful anonymity, the emotional distance, the fear of forming connections that might be used against him. "Madison wants me to consider working with the FBI," he said finally. "Help them track down Victor's remaining network. And it means giving up the life I built here. No more Murphy's Tavern, no more pretending to be a normal civilian. It means accepting that I'll always be a weapon, just pointing myself in a different direction." Father Martinez was quiet for a long moment. "You know what I think you're real. Fear is? Enlighten me. You're afraid of hope. You're afraid to believe that you can have both, that you can serve a greater purpose and still have a life worth living." The priest leaned forward. "You've been punishing yourself for 3 years, Michael. Maybe it's time to forgive yourself and start building something instead of just hiding." Michael found Madison at Murphy's Tavern that evening, sitting at the bar where Dmitri had first confronted him less than a week ago. The place felt different now, smaller somehow, as if his awareness of the larger world had shrunk his sanctuary. "Tommy's been asking questions," Madison said as Michael poured himself a beer. "He knows something big went down, and he's not buying the federal cover story. Tommy's a good detective. He'll figure it out eventually. Will you tell him?" Michael considered the question. Tommy Kowalski had been his first real friend in civilian life, the closest thing to normal he'd experienced since leaving Delta Force. But normal was a luxury Michael wasn't sure he could afford anymore. "Depends on what I decide about your offer," he said. Madison turned to face him fully. "The FBI needs people who understand how Victor's network operates. Not just tactically, but psychologically. Men like Bear, like the prisoners we rescued, they'll need handlers who know what they've been through. And you think I'm qualified?" I think you're the most qualified person I've ever met. Madison's voice carried conviction. You survived what Victor did to your team. You helped Dmitri overcome years of manipulation, and you brought Bear back from the edge of complete psychological breakdown. I also spent 3 years hiding behind a bar, pretending I was someone else. No, you spent 3 years learning how to be human again. There's a difference. Before Michael could respond, the tavern door opened. Dmitri Volkov entered, moving with the same predatory grace, but carrying himself differently, less like a weapon seeking a target, more like a man choosing his own path. Thought I might find you here, Dmitri said, approaching the bar. Debriefing finished? Finished enough. My government is displeased. With recent revelations about Colonel Petrov's involvement with Victor, there will be consequences. Dmitri's smile held no warmth. As for me, I have been offered several opportunities. GRU wants me to return to active duty. SVR wants to recruit me for foreign operations. CIA wants to flip me entirely. What do you want? Madison asked. Dmitri accepted the vodka Michael poured without being asked. I want to finish what we started. Victor's network extends far beyond what we disrupted in Pittsburgh. There are other operators like Bear, other prisoners like the ones we rescued. And there are other Viktor Kozlov's arms dealers and intelligence brokers who view soldiers as disposable assets. So you're staying? Michael asked. I am requesting political asylum in the United States, with the understanding that I will work with federal agencies to dismantle international arms trafficking networks. Dmitri raised his glass. It seems we are forming a partnership, whether you accept Agent Huff's offer or not. Michael looked between them, Madison with her FBI credentials and unwavering determination, Dmitri with his lethal skills and newfound moral purpose, both offering him a chance to transform his guilt into something useful, his isolation into connection. There's something else, Madison said quietly. Victor's been transferred to a DX Florence. Maximum security, no communication with the outside world. But his lawyers are already working on appeals, and his network has resources we're still discovering. You think he'll escape? I think men like Viktor Kozlov don't stay buried for long, which means this isn't over. Michael drained his beer, feeling the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. He could walk away, return to his carefully constructed anonymity, let others fight the war against Victor's legacy. Or he could accept that some battles chose their warriors, whether those warriors wanted to fight or not. When do we start? He asked. Madison's smile lit up the dim tavern. Tomorrow morning. FBI headquarters, 9 a.m. Briefing on Victor's international operations. And Bear? He'll join us when he's ready. The doctors say his recovery is progressing faster than expected. Turns out Delta Force training runs deeper than psychological conditioning. As they prepared to leave, Michael took one last look around Murphy's Tavern. The regular customers, the familiar conversations, the simple peace of serving drinks to honest people, all of it would still be here when he needed it. But he wouldn't be hiding behind it anymore. Some wars couldn't be won by running away. Some responsibilities couldn't be abandoned, no matter how much you wanted a normal life. And sometimes, the family you chose was worth more than the peace you thought you needed. 1 year later, Michael stood behind the bar at Murphy's Tavern, but this time it felt different. The FBI task force had dismantled Victor's network across 3 continents, and the arms dealer would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Tommy raised his glass from his usual stool. To the weirdest federal operation in Pittsburgh history. Madison laughed, her wedding ring catching the light as she reached for her wine. Still can't believe you proposed during a raid briefing. Seemed like the right time, Michael replied, noting how Dmitri smiled at their banter. The Russian had found his own peace, working with international law enforcement, while building a life that was finally his own choice. Bear appeared from the kitchen, carrying a tray of food for their small celebration. His recovery was complete, his demons conquered through purpose and brotherhood. Victor made one mistake, Bear said, settling beside them. He thought broken soldiers stay broken. He never understood that some families choose each other, Dmitri added, raising his vodka. Outside, Pittsburgh hummed with ordinary life people who would never know how close they'd come to disaster, protected by those who chose to stand watch. The war against men like Victor would continue, but they would face it together. Warriors who'd found their way home, not by abandoning their purpose, but by discovering that duty and love weren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes that made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. 6 months after the final toast at Murphy's Tavern, Michael found himself in a situation he'd never imagined, sitting across from a Senate Intelligence Committee, not as a subject of investigation, but as an expert witness helping to reshape how America handled compromised assets in psychological warfare. The Kozlov case demonstrated critical gaps in our interagency coordination, Senator Patricia Williams stated, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades navigating Washington's political waters. Your task force's success came from breaking down institutional barriers that had existed for years. Michael adjusted his tie, still felt strange wearing suits instead of tactical gear or bartender's aprons, and leaned toward the microphone. With respect, Senator, our success came from something simpler than bureaucratic reform. We remembered that intelligence operatives are human beings, not disposable assets. The committee room buzzed with quiet conversations as senators and staffers processed his words. Beside him, Madison squeezed his hand under the table, a small gesture of support that reminded him how much his life had changed. The Kozlov Network Recovery Program has successfully rehabilitated 43 compromised operatives across 7 countries. Michael continued. But the real victory isn't in the numbers, it's in proving that psychological conditioning can be overcome when people have something worth fighting for. After the hearing, they walked through Arlington National Cemetery, a ritual they'd maintained since moving to Washington. The headstones stretched endlessly across manicured hills, each one representing someone who'd made the ultimate sacrifice for principles larger than themselves. Think we're making a difference? Madison asked as they stopped at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Ask me in 10 years, Michael replied, but his voice carried conviction. Victor's network is dismantled, but others will take his place. The difference is, now we know what to look for. His phone buzzed with a text from Bear. New class of rescued assets arrives next week. Dmitri's cooking his grandmother's borscht to welcome them. You'd better bring that Irish whiskey. Michael smiled, remembering how strange it had felt when their informal partnership became an official program. The Kozlov Network Recovery Center operated out of a converted military facility in Virginia, providing psychological rehabilitation and career transition services for intelligence operatives who'd been compromised, manipulated, or abandoned by their agencies. You miss it? Madison asked, noting his expression. What? The old life? The simplicity? When the biggest decision was whether someone wanted another beer. Michael considered the question as they walked toward their car. The work they did now was harder than anything he'd experienced in Delta Force, tracking down broken soldiers, rebuilding shattered trust, helping people rediscover their humanity after years of being treated as weapons. No, he said finally, I don't miss hiding from who I was. This is what I was meant to do. Their phone rang simultaneously. Emergency protocol. Another arms dealer had surfaced in Eastern Europe, another network of compromised assets needed rescue. Some wars never ended. But now at least, they weren't fighting them alone.